Greetings and salutations. Welcome again to the Snarp Fangle Podcast. So I've got a special guest with me here today. He's a man of the soil, a brewer of beer, an enthusiast of all things diesel-powered, and just an all-around great guy, Justin King. How are you, Justin?
Great. How are you doing?
Fantastic.
Beautiful, warm, and sweaty day.
Oh, yeah. So, Justin's here. He's brought a few topics to the table, and so, without further ado, I think I'm gonna give it to you, sir.
All righty. Well, the first topic we could talk about is just a short, brief history of my life.
Sounds good.
I was born July 23rd, 1985, in a beautiful small town now I forgot this. It was Frankfurt, Germany. Kentucky. Sorry, Frankfurt, Kentucky. It was actually on Ireland, in Ireland Army Hospital on Fort Knox, Kentucky, which is, most people know Fort Knox being the place where the United States stores all of its gold, the mini bullion we have. And I'm doing the air quotes right now. Anyways, I was about a month old. My dad got an assignment in Germany, so we moved. Me and my older sister, she's 4 years older than me, moved to, I believe it was, it's either East or West Berlin. I can't remember now. It's either East or West, but this is when the Berlin Wall was still standing. Woo! Thanks, Mr. Gorbachev. No. And so we were over there for a while. My sister, she went to school. I think it was kindergarten there. I think like something like that. But anyways, my dad did his assignment there. We moved back to the States, and I believe it was 86, maybe even 87. I'm not sure. And moved to a small town called Hopland in a rural county in California called Mendocino County. A beautiful county. Anyway, so I was pretty much raised in Mendocino County up until my young adulthood. Then let's see, I believe I was 19 when we moved over here to the outskirts of Chico. So it's a small town of Capay. A lot of the listeners will know where I'm talking about. But just outside of Chico on the other side of the Sacramento River, North Sacramento Valley. It gets super hot in the summer and not too cold in the winter. So it's the perfect place to live, in my opinion.
Indeed it is.
Yes. So anyways, before I moved over here, I was living in Eugene, Oregon. This would have been 2005, I believe. For a little while, I was doing some BMX, dirt jumping, stuff like that up there. I went up with a buddy of mine. He was going to college up there in Eugene. And I thought, I'll just cruise up with you, see what kind of dirt jumping, stuff you guys had, or skate parks, whatever. And it was awesome up there. But I moved up there in, I believe it was January. I think it was December or January. And it was a horrible time. It rained the whole time. I barely rode BMX. And yeah, pretty much after that, I got fed up with that. I think I was there for 3 months. I think it was the whole winter. It was December through March or April. Moved back in with my parents in Redwood Valley, which is in Mendocino County. It's just north of Ukiah. And was there for a little bit. And that was when MySpace first started. I don't know if you guys know what MySpace is, but it was way before Facebook. Anyways, I was on there, I think a week or two. And because a buddy of mine was like, oh, you got to get Facebook. MySpace. It's awesome. I'm like, I don't know what this is, but I'll sign up. Anyway, so within a week or two, I got this message from this girl and all it said was, "How you doing?" And checked out her profile. I'm like, oh man, it was a picture of my wife now. Her name is Sarah. She was standing there with two boys, and I'm like, oh man, I ain't messing with no girl with no kids. So I think I might have said hi or something like that. But anyways, come to find out that was just her nephews. And long story short, I met her in person on Easter at her church down in Cloverdale, which is the first town in Sonoma County, just north of Mendocino County. And hit it off. Another long story short, we have two boys now. One's 14, one's 4. We waited 10 years between the two, which is awesome. And we've been married since 2007. Do the math, it's 17 years, something like that. So we have a beautiful family, have nice property out in Capay here, and that's where we just go into the next venture I took, which is farming. I started just gardening a little bit bigger than most people do, in hopes of selling my produce at farmers markets and stuff like that. But, you plant a bunch of stuff and half of it grows and then you end up eating the other half. So it never worked out for me. And so I got into hay, growing hay. It doesn't make you rich, but it does help a little bit, a little supplemental. And I do a lot of gardening, just regular sweet corn, you name it, zucchini, tomatoes, onions, garlic, you name it, I could grow it. And that's about it with gardening. And anyways, what do you think there, David? You want to talk about some conspiracy theories?
I'm always down to talk about conspiracy theories. For those of you who aren't aware, who may be just joining us, I'm an avid follower of all things conspiracy theory, and I'm the type of person who thinks Alex Jones is a national treasure. And, Justin here, he loves a good conspiracy theory, too.
Yes, I do.
So, let's just dive right into it. You got any particular ones on your mind that you want to talk about?
Well, the first one, I grew up in a rural area in Mendocino County.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of folklore going around about Bigfoot. That's a hot topic over there. I've never seen Bigfoot before, but I've seen signs.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Me and my dad, from the time I was little, and my grandpa, we used to do a lot of hunting, like pig hunting, deer hunting, turkey hunting, you name it. Quail, anything that anything that lives over there, we hunted if it was tasty. And there's been times where I was out in the woods and, this would have been Mendocino National Forest, circa 1994-ish, where, we'd stay a week over there, camp out hunting, stuff like that, get up early, go do a scout, we'd call it. So we'd scout an area, and if we didn't see any deer, we'd move on the next morning. We'd go scout a different area, stuff like that. But there was a lot of different times where when you're sitting there, sometimes you'll be watching a ridge line, waiting for, like, if my dad or one of his friends were working that ridge line on the other side, they were trying to either jump something or see if something's over there. I'd be sitting up kind of watching the whole area, and just the hair on the back of your neck would stand up like something's watching you, and you'd kind of look around, not see anything, but it was almost like your sixth sense kicked in, and never knew what it was back then, but There was one time I was kind of scouting the area, and same thing, hair on the back of my neck stood up, but it ended up being a mountain lion. It was on the next ridge over. I'd say, if you guys know what yards are, it was probably a good 200 yards away. I couldn't throw a rock at it. Let's put it that way. That was the only other time I actually saw something, an actual animal that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But I think it was Bigfoot was stalking me.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So
See,
or an alien, one or the other.
Bigfoot's one of those things where it's like I've been fascinated by Bigfoot, but I guess I'm too much of a skeptic to really believe it per se. But there is some interesting stuff out there. Like one thing that always intrigued me about Bigfoot was, so I'm sure both you and most of our listeners who know who Bigfoot is are probably aware of what is considered kind of like, ground zero of supposed Bigfoot footage. It was up at I
think Trinity County.
Yeah, somewhere up there, like a logging camp or something.
Yeah, Willow Creek, I believe. Which I have a story about that too, but we'll talk about that later.
And so a guy's filming, and he happens to catch sight of something, and he moves his camera over way across where the tree line is, and over in the bush you see what looks like a large hairy creature kind of skulking away. And so what I thought was really interesting about that's basically the prime Bigfoot footage right there. And what I thought was interesting about that is if you look closely at that at the supposed creature in the video,
the cryptic.
What do they call them? Cryptids?
Yeah, cryptids.
It's got mammaries.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lady Bigfoot.
Yeah. Maybe C's, maybe a little small D's.
So I always thought it interesting because generally there's no way that's an animal. There's no way the thing that's an animal in that video. And so generally the people who want to say it's not real, like the only real explanation you could go to is it had to have been a hoax of some kind. And in my mind, how are some some random logger dudes up in Trinity County decide to make a what looks like a gorilla costume with boobs, and
it looks real.
So that always, like, I'm definitely a skeptic when it comes to Bigfoot, but just the fact that the prime OG Bigfoot footage has got what appears to be a lady Bigfoot has always stood out to me as rather intriguing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, give me your story. I think I've heard it before, but
yeah. So this was before I was born. Go back to, this would have been, I would say, the late 60s, early 70s. My mom and her parents, which are my grandma and grandpa, they lived in Willow Creek, which is a super small town in Mendocino. Or actually, no, it's in Trinity County. Sorry. It's just north of Mendocino County. And my grandpa worked for Caltrans over there, road worker, and my grandma was a stay-at-home mom. Back there, you didn't really, there wasn't a lot of jobs for women back then, especially in small rural towns like that. So she stayed home with her two kids, which is my mom and my uncle. And anyways, I guess one night, this is my mom's story. One night, there was like it woke my mom up. It sounded like somebody was throwing rocks at her window, like small pebbles almost, and it woke her up. Well, her room was, because their house was built off of a side of a hill almost, so half of the house was on pillars. So it was like at least 10 to 12 feet up was where the floor would be. And then you got another 4 feet to where the windows would be. And I could be totally saying this wrong. It could only be 8 or 10 feet, but either way, it's off the ground substantially. And anyways, whatever woke my mom up, she got up and looked out the window, and it was a bright moon night. I wouldn't call it a full moon, but she said it was bright. And there was this thing, she thought it was a bear, was looking into her window, and it had been throwing pebbles or throwing rocks. And as far as I know, bears don't throw things, like besides maybe their own feces or something. But either way, she thought it was a bear. She told my grandpa and everything. She woke him up because she was little. I think she was 5 or something like that, 6 or something at the time. But either way, they kind of didn't tell anybody because, the Bigfoot thing was going around. They didn't want to, have people think that they were crazy or anything. Anyways, I hear this story this was years ago as a young adult, and I go, holy cow, my mom saw Bigfoot, because I don't know any bears, especially that are in Trinity County. They don't have big grizzly bears or anything. It's all just small little black bears. And as far as I know, there ain't no black bears that are, 10 to 12 feet tall that would throw pebbles to wake, anyways. My conspiracy is that my mom saw Bigfoot, and even to this day, she's like, it was just a big bear or whatever. But I'm like, no, it wasn't. That was Bigfoot. So, and I wasn't there. So I believe my mother saw Bigfoot, but she just denies it.
So she doesn't believe it.
I think she knows what she saw, but she doesn't, because so many people were calling all the people that had sightings, they were calling them crazy. Kind of the same with the alien people, Oh, I saw aliens. They call them crazy lunatics. So I think that's what scared her from actually coming out and saying, I think that was Bigfoot. But it was dark. She said the moon, it was enough light from the moon to where she could see that it looked like a hairy creature, but the only thing she knew of that was out there was a bear. So that's what she resorted to because she didn't want to be called crazy.
Yeah.
So, well, anyways, that's my little story of Trinity County Bigfoot sightings. Or if you want to go by the Squatch sighting. So, anyways, yeah. Besides that, do you have any more conspiracy theories you want to talk about?
Let's see. Well, it's sort of conspiracy theory adjacent, but it's kind of topical. So I mentioned Alex Jones earlier, and for those who don't know,
he's a savage.
He just got hit with a sum total judgment. I think it was like 2 or 3 different judgment of like 1.2 billion, something like that.
Which is unrealistic to pay for a normal human being.
Yeah, it's totally unheard of for what was a civil trial. He was not convicted of crime.
Yeah.
In that trial. That was a civil trial. He was found liable.
Conspiracy.
He was found liable for $1.1 or $1.2 billion worth of damages.
Quote unquote.
Air quotes, of course. So I find it really interesting how
they're still not going to shut him up, though.
Yeah,
they'll still tell the truth.
They're trying really hard.
Yeah.
Really, really hard to shut him up because thus far in trying to pay off his enormous debt to these families, his company InfoWars has thus remained untouched. But I can't remember.
InfoWars was big. That was
yeah,
a big
I can't remember how long ago. It's just recently. It's been within the last month or so. The
stocks just skyrocketed in InfoWars.
People are speculating that because what's happening is the lawyers for these families are trying to get InfoWars liquidated. They're trying to shut him up.
Yeah.
So, and at one point, a judge ruled that InfoWars was not going to be liquidated, that it was going to be focused, that his other assets were going to be sold off for the purposes of repaying this judgment. But
compensating, what was it? The families
of the victims of Sandy Hook.
Because he used the First Amendment
to
say something and it hurt their feelings, so now they're suing him.
Well, yeah, it's totally just a ploy to shut him up.
Exactly.
But essentially what they're alleging is that he mobilized his followers to send them death threats and to find, their work and their home address and actually go after them. And, there's...
Sounds expensive.
There's a documentation of, somebody found out, where one of their businesses used to be or something like that, some minor things. But essentially they're alleging that Alex Jones has mobilized his army of diehard followers to attack them and put their lives and their livelihood at risk over this.
I don't know. Sounds like his First Amendment is being, what's the word? Infringed upon.
Yeah, yes. I totally agree.
Yeah.
What's so interesting to me about this is, since when is a person sharing their opinion responsible for what somebody else does in response to hearing that opinion, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
So
especially if it's already after the fact something happened.
Yeah. So if there's if death threats got sent or some doxing happened, for those who don't know, doxing is where you divulge the details of a person's identity or their place of residence, on the internet.
Yeah. It's like you slander them, sort of.
Yeah. Or essentially you make it so that people on the internet know who they are, know where to find them.
And then they fill the comments with horrible or delightful things, one or the other.
Yeah. So, there's been so even if there's been death threats and doxing and all of that, it's logically, you would think that the person who did the death threats, who did the doxing, they would be responsible for it.
Yep.
But those people, don't have, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars worth of assets for these... a
target.
Yeah, for these lawyers to go after. So they've sort of invented this this whole Alex Jones is mobilizing his followers and driving them insane and turning them into a hate mob so that they can go after him instead. And because it's not a criminal trial, no one who has the power to stop this is going to say that his First Amendment rights are being violated because, again, it's technically not a criminal trial.
Yeah, which is crazy. Yeah, I didn't know civil trials could be that high of, what is it? Something $1 billion? Something?
Yeah.
Crazy.
And we actually...
And it's almost like a class action lawsuit, what it sounds like.
Yeah, it really is. They're essentially weaponizing the legal system.
Sure. Yeah.
Because civil trials, because they're not criminal trials, have always been kind of anything goes, sort of. And basically it's been up to people, to lawyers, judges, litigants, et cetera, to show restraint in the kinds of, weird out there things they're going to engage in, because there's really not, because it's not a criminal trial. No one's guilty of a crime when a
Sure.
judgment in a civil trial is handed out.
Yep.
They can kind of basically say anything goes, you know?
Mhm.
And so up to this point, I guess nobody has really had the balls to utilize civil trials in this manner.
Mhm.
But it's very interesting that it seems like we're entering an era where such things are being weaponized.
Yeah. And it's always financially, because what is the one thing that holds people up in life pretty much is finances. If you take finances away from somebody, it's like they're trying to make Alex Jones a homeless bum kind of thing, you know, if you think about it. What I'd like to see, and this is another goes along with those conspiracies with the what I'd like to see is the families that are quote unquote suing him. I'd like to see where all that money that is funding their for their lawyers and stuff is coming from. You know, is it a private organization, you know, quote unquote .gov or something like that? It's kind of fishy, you know. There's only a handful of families that are even involved.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, oh, you're suing him for that much money. How much are you paying your lawyers? Like, what is Alex Jones countersuing them? You know what I mean? Like, if he countersues them for the same amount, who's going to pay that billion plus dollars out of those families? Aren't they regular middle class families? You know.
So as I haven't done, it's been a little while since I've done the research. I think we actually talked about this on a previous episode of Snarp Fangle.
Nice.
Man, we're getting self-referential. We have enough
Hashtag Snarp Fangle.
Yeah, we have enough of a backlog of episodes. We're going after the same topic twice. That's amazing.
It's gonna be better this time though.
But
Sorry, whoever it was before.
no, I think it was just me and Jake before.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Jake. Love you, man.
It's been a while since I've done the research on this, but from what I understand, the families of these kids, these victims, are actually pretty well to do.
Yeah.
Because the Sandy Hook community is, from what I understand, a pretty ritzy neighborhood, shall we say.
Okay.
But what's interesting too is there's been rumors going around that
I know where you're going with this.
that they themselves were actually hesitant to go after Alex Jones.
Okay.
But they were just
Sounds like they had
happy.
an influencer.
They were just happy to have him to admit that it actually happened and stop saying it was a false flag operation, all that. But there are rumors spreading around the interwebs that some organizations, shall we say,
.gov, yeah,
have kind of pushed them, saying, no, you should go after him.
Sure.
You know, you deserve it, kind of a thing. You suffered enough, and now this man is trying to say that your suffering wasn't real, kind of a thing. You know, I wasn't there, obviously, but I can easily imagine how the conversation went.
Sure. Took him out to lunch on our tax dollar dime.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it kind of sounds like to me. But, you know, the old Alex Jones, you know, I don't think he's wrong in most things, but he's entertaining. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, I always take everything he says with a grain of salt, but I find endless entertainment in the things that he says. I think one of my, I have to do it because one of my favorite quotes of all time from him is the chemicals in the water. They're turning the friggin' frogs gay.
Making the frogs gay. Yeah. One of my favorite.
That's a classic right there. But another one of my favorites was he was on Joe Rogan. I think he was on Joe Rogan a couple times.
Yeah.
And I don't remember which time because I didn't watch both of them. But this is when Rogan was kind of like quote unquote banned on YouTube.
Yeah.
So this was when he was on
before the whole Spotify.
Well, he was on Spotify.
Oh, okay.
And Spotify kept their deal with him going, but all the other social media companies at the time, because, he was having people on his show that were
controversial.
They were going against the narrative of,
the agenda.
Yeah, in regard to certain COVID-related topics.
Yeah.
Some of them were promoting ivermectin as a possible treatment for COVID, and the powers that be didn't like that.
That's a horse dewormer.
So for a while he wasn't, and I think he did have some kind of a exclusivity agreement with Spotify at the time. But with all of that, he was just, in general, not on any other social media platform other than Spotify.
Which was good for Spotify.
Oh, yeah.
That was a good deal.
But I managed to catch somebody uploaded the entirety of one of his Alex Jones episodes to YouTube. Like, it was just a random third party.
Banned.
It's probably that video is probably long gone by now, but I managed to catch it while it was still up. And I watched it, and man, that was a good episode. I don't remember.
Makes your brain think about
I'm not a regular Rogan watcher, so I don't know which one it was, but that was a good episode. And there was one thing he said in particular that always sticks with me. He's talking about electric cars, and he's talking about how...
Which have been around for over 100 years.
He's talking about how, in order to run all these electric cars, the grid is going to have to be upgraded, and since we aren't even close,
it needs to be like tripled almost.
Since we aren't even close to even replacing the power that we produce now using renewable resources, the vast majority of that energy that's going to power these electric cars, if the so-called electric car revolution actually happens, and gas cars become like, a thing of the past or whatever. If that actually happens, all the energy for these electric cars is going to be coming from coal plants.
Or just huge petroleum powered something.
Yeah, it's going to be...
Unless we come up with crystal energy from, the land of wherever.
Yeah, that's not going to be... It's not going to be coming from renewable energy, because renewable energy makes up like 2-3% of our energy production, if that.
I know, living in California, that especially in the cities, that there is more solar panels on pretty much 90% of the houses now. Where I don't understand, when the sun's shining, I don't understand how we don't produce more power than half the country. Just this one state of California, because they pushed solar for decades, and these people, they gave them tax incentives and all this other stuff, and all these homeowners were like, "Oh yeah, we'll throw them up on our house, on our roof and stuff." Oh yeah, they're putting lag bolts and screws in our roofs. It's fine. It won't leak. Yeah, but it's almost like I don't know if they were tricked into doing it or what, but. Everybody I know that has solar panels, they still are paying, a certain amount a month, for electricity, whether it be you're paying for your solar lease, or if you took a loan out to buy your solar panels and all that, you're still paying something per month. So it's like, but their excuse for buying that is, well, PG&E, which if you guys don't know, if you're not in California, PG&E is Pacific Gas and Electric. They have pretty much monopolized the electrical and gas industry around here in California. There are certain cities and stuff that are on their own stuff, but I'd say at least 80% of California is on PG&E, and they've pretty much got everybody by the balls, and they could charge whatever they want. And after there's some conspiracies about some of the wildfires that have happened in the last decades. How they said they weren't going to raise rates because of that, but with all the lawsuits and everything, they've came up with a crafty plan to raise the rates. And it's not crafty, but it kind of is. Like, somebody that's in their right mind can look at it and go, wait a second, we were paying this amount per kilowatt hour, 10 years ago. And then after all these wildfires, now we're paying triple, and it's only at this certain time of the day from 4 to 9. But it's a little ploy to get the money back from their lawsuits. But anyways, back to the whole electrical side of it. I don't think we'll ever be able to, in California here, get to 100% electric especially on charging vehicles. And now they're pushing, if you want to run a weed eater or lawnmower or chainsaw, leaf blower, everything you can imagine that has a small engine, they're trying to get rid of and push this electrical thing. Well, yeah, a lot of these politicians have stocks in these electrical companies, and I'm not going to name any names, but it's one of our head leaders here in California has stocks in PG&E and stuff like that. And they're pushing this agenda, but they're not thinking of the logistics of it and the electrical grid, for one. Just with if you minused every single electrical thing, including cell phone chargers, televisions, everything, just the Teslas that are in California, we can barely power them. If every Tesla in California tried to charge at the same time, we'd have brownouts probably. And that's with coal power. And so what I'm getting to is, I think since we're never going to go 100% electric, unless we, unless PG&E, they put 3 times as many power lines in and 3 times as many coal plants in. That's the only, and then they're going to charge the electrical consumers 3 times as much to pay for all that stuff, which will never happen. I think we should just start thinking of other alternatives, which that's where the whole diesel side of it comes in. I'm a huge diesel advocate.
Yeah.
And, most people hear the word diesel and they think, oh my gosh, black smoke. Oh, it's ruining the environment. But that's old diesels. All the newer diesels, even from the mid 90s, I mean, all of them are super clean burning. You get really good fuel economy. But I ran into a guy probably in, I would say it was 2004, 2003. I was right out of high school. So I graduated in 2003. So it was just out of high school. I moved up to a little hippie ranch, Greenfield, #Greenfield. Anyways, he ran his truck on biodiesel, which I thought was pretty cool. I asked him a bunch of questions, and it was, the answer was, it's all it is vegetable oil. It's just been converted, like you strip the glycerin out of it, which the glycerin is like the thick part of the oil. Mm-hmm. So you're pretty much thinning the oil out. You're stripping this product out of it. Anyways, and then you can run it in diesel vehicles. Any diesel vehicles, tractors, cars, trucks, you name it. And I thought that was awesome. So I kind of did a little research. This is before the internet, or before I had the internet, way before smartphones. I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. You can actually run a combustion engine on something that a farmer grew and harvested and then pressed the oil out of. You could run an engine off of that. That's awesome. And I already had like a background in, all throughout high school, I took ag classes and stuff like that. So I was like really into agriculture at the time, and all the way up to now. So after high school, I had heard about the oil thing, and I thought, oh, that'd be great if you can grow your own oil crops, canola oil. People call it rapeseed, but it's canola oil. Even olive oil, you name it. Anything that produces oil, you could press into, or if it produces oil, any form, like even 1%, you can get that 1% out of there, or a partial of it, and turn it into fuel. Anyways, so after me and my wife Sarah got married, I think we were married at the time. Yeah, I bought a 1987 Mercedes-Benz 300 SDL, hoopty ride, 4-door sedan. It had a straight 6 turbo diesel. It was a 3-liter. Anyways, it was gangster. But I started messing around with vegetable oil. And first I started making biodiesel. We bought it was actually my wife's parents at the time. Well, my wife's mom and her stepdad at the time bought a biodiesel kit thing that I put together for me. It was like a processor, they call it, and where I could take raw vegetable oil, put it in the thing, and I add it was lye, or they call it a catalyst, and methanol, which is a high alcohol. It's a racing alcohol. You could buy. I bought it in Chico by the barrel, but you titrate the oil. Whatever the titrate says, that's what your catalyst. You have to add your catalyst to it. You're already using a certain amount of methanol per gallon of oil, so that's easy. And then when you titrate the oil, that's how much catalyst you add. Anyways, figured that out. Funny thing is, my neighbor at the time was already making it. He'd been making it for years, and I never had met my neighbor when we first moved there. Well, finally, the way I met him was I was driving by his shop one day, and his shop door was open, and I saw what looked exactly like the same biodiesel processor I had. And so I pulled in there to talk to him one day, and he's like, "Yeah, I've been making biodiesel for years. It's a no-brainer," because he ran tractors and trucks and stuff like that. But anyways. So I started, after I learned about the biodiesel thing, I started collecting oil. I made my own vacuum tank, which you can go up to a barrel and it'll suck a barrel of oil, which a barrel is 55 gallons. It'll suck a barrel dry in less than a minute. And it goes into the tank, and then I can take it home and process it, do further processing on it. And learn how to do biodiesel. Found out, because biodiesel at the time, this was early 2000s or mid 2000s, maybe even later 2000s, but the cost to make biodiesel was $1 a gallon to make a gallon of usable diesel, clean diesel. And that was back when diesel fuel, like petroleum diesel, was, I believe it was like $1.75, maybe $2, somewhere around there. Thank you, George Bush. Anyway, so I figured, okay, this cost me $1 a gallon. Well, when diesel rose to like almost $5 a gallon, this was in somewhere, it had to have been somewhere around 2009, I want to say, maybe 2010. It rose, don't quote me on that, but it rose somewhere around $5 a gallon. Well, everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, $5 a gallon, blah, blah, blah." And I thought that was great that I was only paying $1 a gallon for diesel. Well, come to find out, you could take just straight vegetable oil, filter it down, and if you could, especially in the wintertime, if you could get it to a certain temperature, your diesel engine will inject it and it'll burn it better than diesel fuel, petroleum diesel. So I kind of just dropped the biodiesel thing, because it was costing me $1 a gallon to do that, even though I was saving a lot of stuff, or saving a lot of money. But it also took like 2 to 3 days to make 40 gallons, which was, at the time, I had a 01 Dodge. This was after the Mercedes. I had a 01 Dodge diesel, and it had like a 34-gallon tank or something. So it would take me about 2 to 3 days to actually make a tank of fuel to fill it up. Either way, I was like, $1 a gallon, that just sounds too expensive, even though diesel was $5 a gallon. So I started researching just straight vegetable oil and came across a couple companies at the time. I want to say one of them was called Grease Monkey. I believe they're still in business. They were in San Francisco. They were making in the tank where you could just use the stock tank of your diesel vehicle and add this little heater to it to where you could just run it, fill it up with vegetable oil, filtered vegetable oil, and run it straight. And these people, all their testimonies were like, oh my gosh, I get, 5 miles more per gallon. I get more horsepower. And it smells like, somebody's cooking French fries when you're behind them. And I thought, oh, dude, this is even better. So because I was already collecting the vegetable oil at the time. I just didn't have to buy methanol and the catalyst. And at the time I was using potassium nitrate. And then every once in a while I get some sodium nitrate. But either way, so I thought it was cool. So I started doing that. So I kind of retired the biodiesel processor, and I didn't have to deal with the glycerin, which was the byproduct of making biodiesel. It was this black liquidy, like thick liquid. You really couldn't do anything with it. They didn't want it in the landfills. Some people said, oh, you could use it as a fertilizer. I tried that. You couldn't get rid of it because you could only use it so much when you mix it with water as a fertilizer. And when you're making 40 gallons, every couple of weeks, you're ending up with like 10 gallons of glycerin. Well, you can't go through that much glycerin as a fertilizer unless you had hundreds of acres of fields to spread it on. And so I just said, screw it. I'm not going to even do this anymore. I'm just going to go straight vegetable oil. I learned how to filter it properly. You filter it down to 1 micron. And with the Dodge diesel I bought my neighbor, actually the other guy that made biodiesel, him and his wife had it was a 90 gallon, I think it's 90 gallon. It's an auxiliary tank, so you could put it in the back, the bed of your truck all the way up to the cab, and it held 90 gallons of whatever you wanted it to hold, diesel or whatever. And it had a little toolbox on top, and I was like, this is perfect. So I worked it off. I did some work around there. We just traded work for it. So I worked that off, got that. And then another buddy of mine had a welding company, and he did stainless welding. So I bought all the pipes and stuff like that. Had him weld up the heat exchangers for it. I used zip ties, everything, whatever I can, wire, zip tied everything up underneath the truck to where you couldn't see it, and ran, fuel lines that would accept vegetable oil running through it without it eating it up or anything, and experimented with it, and it worked. And I mean, me and my wife put, I don't even know how many miles on that thing, back and forth to Chico, Redding. We go over to my parents, grandma's, whatever. I mean, we put tens of thousands of miles on it on straight 100% vegetable oil, which some people will say, oh, it's free fuel. It's not exactly free because you got to buy the filters to filter the fuel, and the electricity to pump it. But it was, I think I calculated like 12 cents a gallon to make that stuff. And even to this day, I'm still collecting vegetable oil, small amounts, don't get on me, Highway Patrol, just small amounts. And I filter it. I blend it with diesel fuel for my tractor, because I have an old tractor. It's a 79 Alice Chalmers. I just blend it in it like 75% vegetable oil to 25% diesel, and it runs better than it ever has. It smells great, and I get more horsepower out of it. And I'm paying 75% less for fuel. So
there you go.
That's my rant on vegetable oil.
Yeah.
The renewable resources.
What's really interesting, so while you were talking about that, I had a thought about something, because I drive a diesel car. Sure. You've got a couple diesel trucks and your tractor. Yeah. Your wife has a diesel SUV. Yeah. Somebody else I know has
Volkswagen TDIs, baby.
Yep. Somebody else I know has has the previous generation of the Jetta TDI that I have.
Yep. Minus the emissions, probably.
Yeah, so
Screw deaf.
this is kind of like this is kind of my own personal conspiracy theory, but I always found it so interesting that these Volkswagen TDIs getting quite popular, and they're nice cars.
Yeah,
there's like
they look good.
I think the mine and your wife's are the third generation.
Yeah.
Of TDIs.
And you have a Jetta. She has a Touareg, and I think what of yours is a 15? 2015?
Yeah, 2015. Yeah,
yours is a 2014. Yeah.
Yeah,
that was the part of the Diesel Gate they called it.
Yeah. So both of us have third generation TDIs.
Yeah.
So that they've been manufacturing these for a while.
Sure.
They're quite popular in Europe, and they had been getting more popular in the United States.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, Volkswagen does the stupidest thing.
Yep.
A car manufacturer could possibly do.
Sure.
They put a defeat device on their TDIs.
Yeah.
So that it would test within EPA
standards. Yeah.
Within EPA standards when it was on the bench, but then when it was out on the road.
Which is pretty gangster for them.
I know, right?
They got the vehicles in the country. That's all that matters.
Yeah. But it was funny that was the third generation of diesel vehicles that they had already been selling.
Yeah. What was what did the first ones have? I mean, were they?
Yeah. So the first ones didn't have any scandal like that.
Yeah. So what did they do different?
So so in these third generation, they wanted to. Because the emissions laws in Europe are very different. I mean, they're not gonna be different anymore, given the trajectory of certain things like ultra low emission zones,
the diesel fuel and all that too is
the
different too.
The ULEZ or whatever laws that they're passing in major cities in Europe now. So it's
like a particulate matter kind of thing.
So it's not going to be different. It's not going to be different for much longer, but for a long time, the emissions laws in Europe were a lot less restrictive.
Yeah.
So they could get away with a lot more. And from my understanding, the third generation TDI design was quite a great design.
Sure.
It ran clean.
Mm-hmm.
It had great gas mileage, and they were pretty zippy for such small motored vehicles.
You throw a turbo on anything, man, it goes fast. Might take 3 seconds to get there, but
I guess they really, really wanted the U.S. market to experience that.
Yeah,
because they just straight up ported them over to the U.S. and put on a little doohickey that made it test properly while connected to a computer.
Yeah, and our guys were smarter than that, I guess.
So yeah, it's really. But I mean, you think about it now, and it's like, that's the stupidest thing a large company like that could do. Because Volkswagen is a huge company.
Yeah, maybe they didn't pay the right person off.
They don't own. They don't just make Volkswagen. They own like Audi and a couple other brands.
Yep.
And then they
make tractors too, I think, because where my wife's car was made, it was made in I want to say Slovakia. And it's Volkswagen Ag. So it's actually like a tractor company that makes certain models, I guess.
That would make sense.
Yours was probably made in Germany. Yours
mine is made in Mexico.
Oh, Mexico, yeah.
But
sorry, Mexico. No, I'm just kidding.
Sorry. But so not only are they kind of like a brand umbrella, but they're also, from what I understand, from what the dealer told me when I was buying the car, they're like the world's largest car bank. So they're actually a bank, and they themselves provide car loans for people wanting to buy Volkswagens instead of the normal process is you go to a dealer and the dealer, gets some banks on the phone financing. And says, who wants to finance this?
Yeah.
With Volkswagen, if you're buying a Volkswagen, the dealer just gets Volkswagen finance division on the phone.
They
and
call it Volkswagen Care.
And Volkswagen finances the finances the car purchase themselves. So they're quite a large company. So for them to do something like that is incredibly stupid.
It's almost a conspiracy.
I know, and short-sighted. And the reason why I call it my own personal conspiracy theory is because after that happened, the market for diesel cars in the U.S. vanished.
Yeah. Well, and they started like demonizing diesels, because there was the whole clean diesel thing. And then all of a sudden Dieselgate happens with Volkswagen. And then everybody's like, all the diesels are bad. Blah. And then like in California, and other states too, they're trying to push, get rid of all the diesels and blah, blah, blah. Even though all these newer diesels actually burn cleaner because you're getting more fuel economy out of a gallon of this fuel. So instead of a gallon of gasoline where you can only get, anywhere from 15 to maybe 25, maybe 30 on some of those Hondas and Toyotas and stuff like that. All my diesel trucks, I get 25 miles to the gallon, no matter if I'm putting around town or if I'm on the freeway, because the way a diesel engine runs, it's, it's just, there's no spark plugs or anything. It's just like injecting the same amount of fuel at this, every single time the piston comes up, you're injecting the same amount of fuel. It's just when you hit the throttle, if you're trying to go faster, your pistons are just moving faster. So you're still injecting the same amount of fuel. It's just faster, rotations, whatever. Unlike a gas car, you hit the gas, it just dumps fuel into your cylinder. But that's a different story. Anyways, but these diesel, even my diesel trucks, they get better fuel economy than most of these, even a mid-sized car does. A car from the 90s all the way up till even now. There's still some of the like Nissan Pathfinders and stuff like that. Some of these, they're not necessarily SUVs, but they're like a crossover kind of thing. They're getting like 15 miles of the gallon on gasoline. And I have a full-size truck, long bed, 4-door Cummins diesel, and it's getting 25 miles of the gallon on diesel fuel with no modifications or anything. I mean, let alone if I could burn vegetable oil in there, I would be getting, if not the same fuel economy, a little bit more. I'd be pulling a little more horsepower out of that, which I can go into that now, is like diesel fuel has a cetane rating. Like a gasoline has octane, diesel has cetane. Well, most diesel has a pretty low cetane level in it, which means the cetane is when it injects it into the cylinder and the piston's coming up to compress it, it actually ignites prematurely. When vegetable oil, the cetane level is like twice as high. It actually combusts at the right proper timing, because the diesel engines were created around oil. Rudolf Diesel, who created or invented the diesel engine, actually, they didn't even have petroleum diesel fuel at the time of when he was inventing that. He invented it to run on peanut oil. He had a exhibition in the World's Fair, and the diesel engine ran on peanut oil. It was a single cylinder, huge diesel engine, but that was like his exhibition. Like, hey, this thing, back then they were running steam engines and stuff like that. And he was like, this thing could replace a steam engine, one cylinder. The cylinder was as big around as a sofa, but it could replace a steam engine where you had to build a fire with coal or wood or whatever and keep adding water to it consistently. And this thing, you could just, it just sipped fuel, which the fuel at the time was oil, was from peanut oil. And, his thing was like, hey, a farmer can have a 1 or 2 or 3 diesel engines on his farm. We're talking farms that are, 1,000 acres. They can have, 1, 2, 3 engines to run on diesel. They could run, or they could plant a certain amount of acreage. Say out of 1,000 acres, you planted 100 acres of a canola oil or even corn. You can get oil out of corn, soybeans, you name it. You could take 1/10 of the acreage on your farm and grow it specifically for an oil crop, you can harvest that crop. You could press the oil out of it, which is just running it through an oil press. Nothing. It's just a rudimentary machine, and get this oil. So the farmer could grow his own oil. You could run it in the diesel engine, and not ever have to pay, because back then, even when the diesel engine was first invented, they still had kerosene, so you could run kerosene in it, but it wasn't a viable option back then because it was so expensive. And that was Rudolph Diesel's his kind of pitch to sell the diesel, which it kind of was a slow. It kind of took off slow. But after he started selling those, well, the petroleum industry, which back then it was Standard Oil, they kind of caught on and said, hey, you know what? When we're running this black sludge that we're pumping out of the ground, we're distilling this. We're getting gasoline, kerosene, and then like propane they were burning off. Diesel, I think they were either blending it back with kerosene or they were burning it off. It was a waste product. And then they'd get all their heavier oils and tars and stuff like that. Well, they said, hey, you know what? When we're running our fraction stills, because those stills they have to distill the petroleum, it was a fractional still, so it took off fractions. So if you could picture a cylinder that goes straight up, say every 10 feet had a different fraction. So the very, very farthest fraction would be like propane, which they were burning that off. It just went in. They just burned it. It went into the atmosphere. The methane, or I mean the whatever it is,
propane.
When they burn it, it's carbon monoxide.
Oh, okay.
It would just go in the atmosphere, and then the next one down, it'd be gasoline, and then all the other stuff below that gasoline was like kerosene. They were just blending it all together, and they were selling it for like lamp oil and stuff like that. And then anything below that fraction would have been like motor oil, tar, like for roads and stuff like that, creosote, whatever, all the heavier oils. But Standard Oil, they figured, oh, hey, we could actually fraction off of the kerosene fraction. We could fraction something else off of that, because they were getting more gallons per batch of this other fraction. It was a really thin, like almost watery thin, off of kerosene. And they're like, you know what? We could run this in that Rudolph Diesel's new engine. And so they experimented with it, and they went, oh, it actually works. But ever since then, it never really went anywhere. Like they kept it the same way. And that's why you hear diesels down the road, they're clanking, and what that is premature combustion in the chamber. You'll hear like old Ford 7.3s and stuff. They're going clank, 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 clank. Well, either way, Rudolph Diesel invented that engine to run on vegetable oil. So if you take even an engine to this day, a new engine like these Volkswagens we have, and you put clean vegetable oil through them, the engine will quiet down. Like it'll almost be like a slight purr. It'll just be like a kitten purring instead of clanking. And you get more fuel economy and more horsepower out of it, and the emissions are cleaner, because the diesel fuel from petroleum, it actually emits, like, I can't even name how many different chemicals that you're actually combusting. So they're burning. You're emitting things that, for one, you shouldn't be breathing, but some of that stuff doesn't even. There is no, you don't even register on a smog test, because it's just super minute amounts of certain things that were in it. And they have taken a lot of that sulfur out, so you're not breathing sulfur. But the vegetable oil, when you burn that, it's a higher amount of nitrous oxide, which who doesn't like that? But you're getting none of the other stuff that's coming out of it, because it's not a petroleum product. It's literally just a pure, they call them esters. It's a pure ester from oil that you grow it every year. So if you grew a crop, 100 acres soybeans this year. 100 acres would produce however many thousands of gallons of fuel, and you would run that on your farm, or if you had extra, you'd sell it to the neighbors, whatever. But you're not just, the plants that you grew, that you harvested, already sequestered all the carbon that they could out of the atmosphere, and then you're burning just the oils that those plants produced, unlike pumping, something out of the ground that's been down there for who knows how long. And you're burning that, putting all that in the atmosphere, but there's nothing that's actually what's the word? You're not pulling that carbon back out of the atmosphere like you would if you grew the crop for the oil. Either way, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my oil rant.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, for sure. That's all I can say to that. That does remind me, though, of one of my other favorite conspiracy theories is, you ever hear about synthetic gasoline?
Synthetic gasoline? I don't think so.
So they can manufacture synthetic gasoline. And that part's not a conspiracy theory.
Like not ethanol, but you're talking actually gasoline.
They can manufacture a synthetic analog for gasoline.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's chemically identical to gasoline. I haven't looked into it. But from my understanding, they can manufacture a synthetic alternative to gasoline.
But it's not petroleum. The closest thing I've ever heard of was ethanol, which is, it is a crop you can grow of like corn or switchgrass or whatever, and they use certain yeast to produce it, and it's not the type of ethanol you want to drink.
Yeah.
It's a high alcohol that they distill. It works great for fuel. However, I'm a huge advocate for not using ethanol because I use a lot of small engines, chainsaws, weed eaters, stuff like that, just on our farm. And what happens is because here in California, they add, I believe it's 10% ethanol to our gasoline. And sometimes I think they add more, but they just don't tell you. But sometimes if you run a tank of regular gasoline, like say it's just I always run 91 octane through my small equipment. But say you run a gallon of 91 through your chainsaws or something, and you don't run it all the way out, you leave some of them in it, or some gas in there. Say it sits during the winter. Well, during the winter, it gets humid and it rains and, blah, blah, blah. It seems like that ethanol absorbs, because it is, they call it hydroscopic, something like that. It actually absorbs moisture, like water. And then say in the spring, I go to use my chainsaw again, it might run for a little bit, and then all of a sudden it just like the carburetor's clogged up. I'm like, what the heck? Well, every time I've ever took a carburetor apart, there's a tiny little screens in there, and it always has rust on it. Or like almost like a gelatinous, something that's clogged that little thing. I'm like, what the heck is this? And my conspiracy is that, using that ethanol, it's all great because you can grow the crop, you can burn it, blah, blah, blah. But if you're running it in small engines with carburetors, because fuel injection, that's a different story. But carburetors don't like any little bits of water or anything in it. Mm-hmm. And so I think this ethanol has been, because I've gone through lots of carburetors in the last 20 years whenever they started putting ethanol in fuel. And it's always like every single year almost. I'm like, what is going on here?
I think I've heard that before. Yeah. To be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if that was their plan, was to try and get people just to give up on.
It's almost another conspiracy theory.
Gas weed eaters and gas chainsaws and all that.
Yeah.
But back to synthetic gasoline. It's not the same thing as ethanol. They manufacture it, and what's interesting is the process of manufacturing it and burning it is carbon neutral.
Interesting. I wonder how they're doing that. Yeah.
Because whatever is burned, whatever goes into the atmosphere from burning the fuel, is sucked out of the atmosphere.
It's
during the manufacturing process.
Interesting.
Because they actually suck carbon out of the atmosphere during the manufacturing process.
As like the catalyst or something to make it.
Essentially, yeah. And
my
whatever.
Question is, what's the raw material that goes into, like, how are they getting that liquid fuel? You know, like,
see, that's the thing I don't know about. I haven't had a whole lot of time to really do a deep dive.
Yeah.
But I know that I have done enough research to know that this is an actual thing.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is the reason why it's not like a bigger deal, because you think that would be a big deal, right?
Sure.
But the reason why it's not a bigger deal is because the process is not very cost effective. You can't manufacture the stuff on a large enough scale
to make a profit
and actually make a profit off of it. But to me, that sounds like an R&D problem, right?
Sure. Yeah.
You invest the money into research and development.
Yep.
And that's how you get the manufacturing cost down to where you can make it profitable.
Yep.
But here's where the conspiracy part comes in. Companies who are doing this, who might be tempted to do this, they aren't getting the sweet government kickbacks that other companies are getting for, the carbon credits and green energy subsidies and all that. So most companies, when it comes to developing renewable energy sources, they're going for the things where they're going to give the government kickbacks.
Yeah.
But the government ain't giving no kickbacks for this synthetic gasoline research.
I wonder why. Because the petroleum industry is still live and active. And they're, even like the California thing, I find it funny how, and I'm not going to use any names, but like some of our head leaders have that stocks in like Pacific Gas and Electric. Well, the name Pacific Gas and Electric, what do you think the gas is? They call it natural gas, but it's a petroleum product. It's methane it's petroleum.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they're still pushing. So they're pushing electric vehicles and electric small engine, like weed eaters, lawnmowers, blah, blah, blah. You name it. Yet people's homes are still heated with natural gas. They're still heated with, the cooktops are still, ovens, stovetops, stuff like that. Natural gas, hot water heaters, natural gas. And they control both of those, either electric and gas. So it's like they're not really pushing, like, hey, change your stoves over to electric and change your hot water heater over to electric. They're not really pushing that.
Well, that's going to change soon.
Well, they already own both of the things. So, but the cars, see, they don't. PG&E doesn't own any refineries or anything for petroleum. So that's where they're like, hey, get rid of electric, or start doing electric because we own the electric company. We're only going to make more profits, And it's really, even if every single person in California stopped burning gasoline and diesel, it's barely a drop in the bucket in the petroleum industry. So,
yeah, the petroleum products are everywhere.
Sure. Plastics, foams, you name it.
Makeup, it's all petroleum based.
Exactly. Yep.
There's currently nothing on the market that could replace petroleum on the scale that it's used and be cost effective.
Yeah, exactly. On the scale that it's being used and cost effective, because there are people making, potato starch, silverware and stuff like that, and corn starch, bowls and stuff like that, which they're literally one-use things. You can't just throw them in the dishwasher. They melt pretty much. They're technically biodegradable. So it's like the amount of uses you can get from a plastic bowl compared to a potato starch bowl is you could get thousands of uses off it because it never goes bad. However, that stuff just keeps building up, and when our great grandkids, if they're even around before Jesus comes back, I don't even want to know what this world's going to look like with all the trash, like all the plastic buildup.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
And now back to the fuel thing, there is people out there, and I think it's somewhere in Africa or something. there's some people that are, and I'm sure they're doing it everywhere too, but these guys in Africa were taking old tires, like truck tires and plastic bags and stuff like that, and they're putting them into these huge chambers that they're heating up with like wood fire, and it's like these big steel tanks, which is essentially just a still. If you guys know what a alcohol still is to make moonshine and stuff like that, it's pretty much essentially the same thing. And they're heating all this plastic up to a certain temperature, and these gases are coming off, which are toxic gases coming off of the plastic, and then they're cooling them down in like a water bath type, like say, picture a garden hose or copper tubing going down into a cool water bath. They're cooling this stuff down and it's turning back into liquid, and it's actually it's equivalent to a diesel fuel. So the viscosity is the same. It's really liquidy, almost like really watery almost. However, when you burn that stuff, you're putting all that plastic, whatever the chemicals that were in that plastic, you're putting it back into the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it might be great because you're getting free garbage and free plastic and stuff to make this fuel, but it's like it's not carbon neutral. You're not really helping. If anything, you're making the environment even worse. And then what you have after that, after you run one of those batches of that plastic diesel, whatever, you end up with this stuff called, like, I think they call it coke. It's like an ash from it. So what are you going to do with that? Oh, we'll just go bury it in the ground, So it's like, it makes it even more toxic.
Yeah.
But it is cool that people are experimenting with stuff, but it's like, you're experimenting with the wrong raw material,
Yeah. What's interesting too is thinking about our society's dependence on petroleum products.
Oh yeah. In the last 100 years, it's only been like 100 years.
Yeah. Have you heard about the whole Just Stop Oil thing with the spray painting Stonehenge? Yeah. So it's so interesting that they're doing this. And then I just recently saw a video of a guy like basically touring his property or the outskirts of his property after a bunch of Just Stop Oil protesters had come through there. And so he's like, he finds this, like, he sees a like hole in the hedge and he goes into it and there's just garbage and refuse and plastic everywhere
from the protesters that are protesting plastics and petroleum and stuff.
Yeah, so they're protesting the West's dependence on petroleum products, and they're leaving behind all this litter and garbage
that is petroleum products.
Yeah, and it's just just shows you how short-sighted the people who want to get rid of petroleum are.
They're just a bunch of people that get all excited about something and want their voices heard. The one thing that I laughed really hard about was that there was that one guy that he went out on. It was like an IndyCar race or some kind of car race. I don't know if it was NASCAR or whatever, but he went out on the track and he super glues his hand to the track in protest. And then you look at what super glue is, and super glue is like highly petroleum. So it's just like you're literally using a petroleum product to try to get your cause out there. It just is funny. It makes me laugh all the time. So, anyways, yeah.
I mean, that's the human race for you. We're a bunch of dumb shits.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Well, another thing. I went through. I like doing farming. I really enjoy farming, all aspects of it, because you could produce products you could eat. You could produce products you could burn in your diesel vehicle. You could produce plastics with it. You could feed animals that you could eat, like beef. Anyways, but beer. I am a huge beer advocate. I've always liked beer since I was 21. That same ranch, I met the guy that made biodiesel. Another neighbor of mine up there, he was a home brewer, and I don't know. That ranch it was a lot of hippies. And now that I think about it, I'm like, what the heck was I doing up there? But I think I had a purpose of going up there because I did learn a lot of things, multiple things. I'm not going to get into some of the other ones, but I met this guy that brewed beer. He has since passed. His R.I.P. Jim. He kind of, and it's funny. His name was Jim. At the time, when I first met him, I went, man, this guy really looks like Jim Morrison from The Doors, but he's too fat, whatever. But he looked like Jim Morrison, but he had a longer beard and stuff like that. And I always joked with him. I was like, you're my Jim Morrison, blah, blah, blah. And he laughed. But anyway, it could have been Jim Morrison. You never know. But anyways, he made homebrew. He would go and buy, 50-pound bags of malted barley. He would grow his own hops or he'd buy hops, whole leaf hops, they call them. They're like the whole flower.
Like the whole cone hops.
Yeah, whole cone, yeah. And he made, so his setup was a mash tun, which if nobody knows how brewing is done, you have a mash tun, and that's what you put your ground up malted grains in. And you would add a certain temperature of water. Well, he always taught me, put 122 degree water in it, and you let it rest for at least until it dropped down to 119. So when you're doing a 10 or 20 gallon batch, it takes a while for that water to drop 3 degrees, when you add 122 degrees to it. And he called it the protein rest. Well, what it would do is it would activate certain enzymes in the grains to start converting over into what was starch. It would pull more starches out, pretty much, essentially. And then you would raise the temperature up, which in his case, he used Igloo ice chests, and he had a little false bottom on the bottom, which was made from, he used, I think it was 1/2-inch copper tubing with like little slits. He would take a Hexon little slits in the bottom of it. Anyways, they call it a false bottom. So come time you're draining the stuff off, it wasn't sucking all the grain up. It kind of made its own little filter. But so after the 122 degree protein rest, you would put more hot water in it, like almost boiling hot water in it as you're stirring it, and you would raise it up to 152 degrees, and that's what the starch conversion temperature was. Well, I was still learning about, like the science side of it. Like I'm really interested in the science of a lot of different things, processes and stuff like that, as you probably couldn't tell. And so I was learning about the starch conversion stuff. Well, apparently most starches will an actual starch will convert into a certain type of sugar, granted, if the temperature was right, and the enzymes have been activated. So with barley malt, which barley malt is just a barley seed that you harvest right off the field, but then you take it through a malting process, which is essentially is just a sprouting process. And you only want to sprout it, the roots of the seed, you only want to sprout it no longer than the actual length of the seed itself. And then you got to do it. You could either quick dry it or you can malt it, in which we always malted our grains just slightly, just so your beer had color and a little bit more flavor and stuff like that. So I was doing a lot of research on the malting process, stuff like that. And anyways, back to Jim. So his brewing process was a Igloo ice chest with a false bottom, and then he'd have like a little Camp Chef stove to keep the water. If he needed hot water to add to it, he would always have a pot of hot water. And I mean a big pot, like 10 gallons a pot. And then he had a boil kettle, which was just like a beer keg, like a 15-gallon beer keg with the top cut out. And then he had rudimentary, however you say it, welded a stainless steel valve at the bottom of it. And he had like a little screen on the inside just to filter out any hops or anything like that. So after he would take it through the protein rest in the mash tun and the starch conversion in the mash tun. After a certain amount of time, he would test the liquid in there, which is by that time it was called wort, not wort, but wort, and it's unfermented beer. He would test that, see what the sugar level is in it, and if once it got to a certain sugar level, then he would drain it off into the boil kettle, and that's where you would just have the fire underneath it, like the propane stove or whatever. You would have it on full blast. You would just get it to the rip roaring boil, and that's when you added hops at certain times, stuff like that. After about an hour and a half of boiling it, with the hops and everything in it, then you want to cool it down as fast as possible, as cool as possible, which ideally between like 68 and 75 is where you wanted it. Most of the time, we always got it like down around 90 or 80, which was still pretty warm, but we would let it sit in the fermenter if it was that hot for, maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours, and then we'd pitch the yeast. Well, the yeast is a single cell organism. It produces carbon dioxide and alcohol, and then other esters depending on what it's feeding on. And anyways, this Jim guy, he only brewed in the summertime. He never brewed in the winter. So he always had beers that tasted so different than what I was used to drinking in, like, bottled beers, canned beers. And I said, "What's your secret? Why do these beers taste so different?" And he said, "Well, for one, I ferment a little hotter or like a little warmer than most people. And the yeast he uses, what he does is he pitches beer yeast at the beginning, when it's 75, 80 degrees, somewhere around there, right after he's brewing it. He would let it ferment for 3 days, and then he would pitch champagne yeast into it. And what it would do, within like 2 to 3 days after pitching the champagne yeast, it would not only spike the alcohol level in it, and the carbon dioxide would just be rocking and rolling, but it would also put off different esters, which are like different flavors that the yeast would put off. And what this guy Jim would do, in one batch of beer, if he was doing a 30-gallon batch of beer, he would do a 10-gallon batch of it's all the same exact batch, but he would take 10 gallons and he'd add a certain type of yeast to it. He'd take another 10 gallons, add a certain type of yeast to it, and then he would take the other 10 gallons and he'd add a certain type of yeast to it. So the beer that was brewed with the grain and everything was all exactly the same batch, but he'd add different yeast to each batch, and every batch tasted totally different. And I was always so like enthralled in that, like, how is that possible? You're brewing the same thing, but you're adding, 3 different types of yeast. And that's where the whole, they call it mycology or whatever with the yeast science and stuff. He was a yeast science major or something a long time ago. So he explained to me how certain yeast will eat, even if you feed them the same maltose or whatever sugar you're feeding them to them, they will put off different esters and different, I don't know the other name, but it's different flavors. Also different alcohol percentages. So like the same beer he did, all 3 batches, one could be like a 5%, one could be a 7%, one of them could be, like a 10% or something like that if he pitched the right champagne yeast or, this and that. And anyway, so I got really interested in that. And so from the time I lived up there, which was, I think I moved up there when I was 17. I might have been 18 by that time. I graduated high school when I was 17. So I think I might have moved up there like within a month or so of graduating. So over that year or whatever, I learned a ton about biodiesel, a ton about beer making. And after that, that was when it was after that ranch I lived on, I moved up to Eugene for a little while. And then I moved back to my parents, and that's when I met Sarah. So there was a short period of kind of young adulthood where I was kind of experimenting with things, and not drugs or anything, but like experimenting with, different things, scientific type things I was interested in, things that I could use in life, because I was already drinking beer, so I might as well make your own beer, right?
Yeah.
I was driving a vehicle, might as well make your own fuel, kind of thing. But anyways, so I after I met my wife Sarah, I still was making beer. I actually, after we moved out here to Capay, I put together my own brew setup. It was all propane powered, and I can make 30-gallon batches of beer at a time, which is 2 full beer kegs full. And I enjoyed it. I only did it every once in a while, but I got to the point where I'm like, the raw materials were getting too expensive, which is, malted barley, hops, yeast, any like oatmeal, because I made a lot of oatmeal stouts and stuff like that. So any oats and stuff like that, it got to the point where it was getting so expensive. I just was like, what, I'm tired of this. I'm not gonna do this anymore. I'm just gonna, if I want to drink a beer, I'm gonna go buy a 6-pack or whatever. And so ever since, I haven't brewed a batch of beer, I think since I want to say since it was like 2010 or 2011, maybe 2012. It's been a long, long time.
Oh, dang.
Since I brewed a batch of beer. I still have a passion for it. I still love beer, and I still have the brew setup. I just don't have the desire. And as an adult, I have kids now. We run 2 businesses. I'm busy all the time.
Yeah.
So, but I like drinking beer, so I'll just go buy one. It's easy just to pop a top.
Yeah.
Because brewing beer, it takes a full day to brew it, because from the time you start till the time you're done, because you got to clean up all your equipment.
Oh yeah.
Make sure everything's buttoned up, and then you got to babysit the beer that you brewed that one day. You got to babysit the fermenter for like 2 weeks before it's even done, because it takes about 2 weeks to actually. You got 3 to 4 days of super active fermentation where you literally could see the bubbles like bubbling up through there, which is carbon dioxide. And the funny thing is, I used to brew in our kitchen, and you come in there and it smelled, I thought it smelled delicious. So did Sarah. But it's like some people go in the kitchen like, what the heck is that smell? And what it was carbon dioxide, which would bubble out of your fermenter, and then it's heavier than air, so it'd sink to the ground. And they're like, what the heck is this? That's carbon dioxide. I probably shouldn't be brewing in the kitchen. But
Yeah.
anyways, I did that for a long time. And so, yeah, I'd rather just buy a beer now. But
It's always good knowledge to have, because you never know when you might want to pick that up again. I mean, I've always been interested in brewing and the process, but I've never actually done it myself.
Yeah.
Just don't have the time to.
Sure. And it's not hard. I mean, anybody that has hands and feet could brew beer. I mean, even if you had one hand, you could brew beer, I mean, the drummer from Def Leppard drums with one arm.
Yeah, I know, right?
But yeah, I mean, it's like riding a bike. Like if I didn't brew for another 50 years, and somebody's like, "Hey, come help me brew beer," I would know exactly how to do it, because it is temperature and time. That's really, and then you got to add the yeast. But
yeah,
like
you mentioned the yeast though.
Yeah.
Yeast, I think, is really one of the more fascinating parts of beer brewing, at least to me.
It's
because
very,
you mentioned how that guy added just different types of yeast to the same batch of beer, and it tasted completely different.
They were 3 totally different beers, and it was all because of the yeast. Yeah.
And I mean, you have entire styles of beer that are essentially like like the malt and the hops and all that isn't really a dictate of the style. It's the yeast.
It's the
dictates the style.
Yeah.
And you have companies like Sierra Nevada over there in Chico.
Yep.
They have an entire department. They have an entire department staffed with people just to maintain their yeast culture,
the yeast
so
lab,
that the beer doesn't start tasting differently, because they're getting yeast from different places.
Yeah. And shout out to Sierra Nevada, because every single beer I've ever had from them, minus Keller Weiss, because that beer sucks. Every single beer that I've had multiple batches of, like say I buy a pale ale today. Well, this time next year, it's going to taste exactly the same as what it did this year, because they have that yeast lab that they actually will, with a microscope, will take a yeast sample from each batch. They will scrub. They'll take one single cell from there and scrub it, which is like cleaning it, and keep that one, and then they'll culture that, which means they'll grow it. They'll grow it, because it's a single cell organism buds off, so it like it doesn't lay eggs or has life. It's kind of like a live birth. It just buds off, kind of like a bulb, like a flower bulb does, but way faster when you feed it yeast and nutrients and stuff. And they'll take that one cell and grow it, which is, you can only see it under a microscope, and they'll grow it to a batch of something they could pitch into, they do like, what is it, 50,000 gallons a batch or something like that. I mean, it's a crazy amount of beer.
Which is really insane too, because as far as the overall beer market in the U.S., they're like a tiny fraction of the market.
But they all are.
They're a large
all over
company.
The world,
As far as microbreweries, as they used to be called, I think
they're
called,
macro now.
They're called they're called craft breweries, but they used to be called microbreweries.
Yep.
And as far as microbreweries go, they're definitely one of the bigger ones.
Sure, yeah. And if they could, some of these craft brews, if they could hold on to it and not sell out to, like, I grew up around like Lagunitas, which is they're out of Sonoma County. They sold out. I mean, this was, I don't even remember, 10 years ago, maybe. I don't remember. It was years ago. Sold out to Heineken for like $1 billion or something like that. Even though I've had Lagunitas after they've sold out, it does still taste the same, but it's just the mindset of, now a huge conglomerate owns them, compared to like a small brewery. Because we grew up with Lagunitas, Bear Republic. I don't even know if they're around. I still see their beer, but I actually worked at Mendocino Brewing Company, which was in Ukiah, which is Mendocino County.
Mm-hmm.
They're out of business now. They actually, if you guys know, if you guys are from Chico, used to be Butte Creek Brewing Company in Chico. They were like going out of business, and actually Mendocino Brewing Company bought them, and it was like shortly after that Mendocino Brewing Company went out of business. So, and I don't know what the story with that is, but it seems like these small microbreweries, if they could, or craft breweries, if they could hold on just a little longer, they're gonna make it. But it seems like a lot of these guys are selling out to these bigger breweries. And I say bigger breweries, but it's actually corporations.
Yeah, giant corporations like AB InBev.
They're huge that have billions of dollars to spend. But it's just like Lagunitas. Lagunitas built this. They started with, I think, they probably were home brewers, but they started with this small, like, I think it was a 4-barrel it was something like that. It was really small brewing setup, maybe a 14-barrel. They started small, just like Bear Republic, and they grew like exponentially, like within 10 or 15, 20 years, to where they're brewing, 50 barrels, which is, 3 times as much or 4 times as much almost what they started with. And then all of a sudden they reach a plateau where they're like, they reached all the customers they could reach with their marketing, and they don't see any more growth out of it. So but they've grown big enough to where they're recognized all around the world. And then these big conglomerates come along and they're like, oh, these guys got a cool label. Let's, we'll put a, like Lagunitas, we'll put $1 billion into them,
Mm-hmm.
because they looked at their revenue from the past 5 years or whatever, 10 years, and they were making, a lot of money. So, and some of the owners are like, hey, we've grown, we've hit that plateau, might as well sell out now and we could retire in the Bahamas kind of thing. But
yeah,
but sometimes that doesn't work out for them. If they keep all the same employees, that's one thing, because the employees are what's keeping that place afloat. It's not necessarily the owner. But a lot of the times those conglomerates those corporations will fire everybody and hire their own type of people. And, and it doesn't always work out.
I know there's a brewer I used to hear a lot about back in the day when I was more of a beer nerd than I am now.
Yeah.
Was a brewery called Goose Island. I think they're over on the East Coast.
I think they're still in business.
They are. They're still in business, but I know a lot of. They were one of those. They were one of those breweries that produced kind of what you would call sought after beers. You know, the kind of beers that came out once a year in limited quantities, and people would actually chase the delivery trucks for, kind of a thing.
Oh, that's the good stuff.
Yeah.
In the wood cases.
Uh-huh. And so they were well respected among, the hardcore beer nerds. And then all of a sudden, AB InBev, which is a merger between Anheuser-Busch and InBev, which is a large, huge global brewing conglomerate. So they were purchased by AB InBev, and then
that's like the Standard Oil of beer.
Yeah. And after that happened, it's just like they're still around, but you just don't hear the buzz about them anymore. People aren't interested anymore because now they have that corporate feel to them.
Sure, yeah. Another one as a young adult I used to really enjoy was that was kind of before I ever had Sierra Nevada, was Anchor Steam out of San Francisco. I always liked that Anchor Steam beer. And then one time I got a bottle of it, and I think it had gotten hot or something like that. Like maybe they didn't refrigerate it for a while or something before it hit the stores. But it just had a weird skunky flavor to it, and it kind of, I didn't want to drink it anymore. And then I met old Sierra Nevada here, and I've drank it ever since. It's my favorite. Sierra Nevada is my favorite. I twisted my ankle.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of how Sierra Nevada was discovering Sierra Nevada was for me. It was like love at first sip.
Yeah, and it's always consistent. And I have had Sierra Nevada that wasn't as pleasant as I would have liked, but it wasn't the brewery's fault. It's once it left the brewery, I don't know if it was the distributor or the store that was selling it, but if it leaves the conditioning room from the brewery, it needs to be refrigerated until it's consumed. And I'm a huge advocate for that. That's there was a law, I think it was in Germany or Bavaria or something like that was set long time ago, where beer can only be brewed with water, yeast, hops, and malt. Well, I'm a huge advocate for keeping, I want to start a law where you have to keep beer cold from the time it was, released out of the brewery. Because once it leaves the brewery, it's not the brewery's fault that the distributor or the store owner or even the consumer, say it has been refrigerated from the brewery until the store, and then I go and buy it and set it in my garage for a month and then go crack one open, and it tastes skunky. That's obviously my fault, but I'm an advocate for a law to keep beer cold until consumed.
Yeah, it definitely needs
Proposition 419.
Well, most beers need to be kept cold till they're consumed. Some beers, you don't want them getting hot for sure, but some beers are actually the higher gravity varieties. They do quite well outside of the refrigerator.
Yeah, you
ever tried aging a high gravity beer?
I have, yeah, like barley wines, stuff like that. But you don't want them too warm. You only want them maybe 70. That's max.
Like just below room temperature, I think is the ideal.
Anything over 75, you're pushing it. And that's where any yeast that is still in suspension in that beer, which by that time would have sank to the bottom, because it's reached it's consumed all the if it's the different ale yeast, there's a top ale yeast, bottom ale yeast, stuff like that, like a lager yeast, stuff like that. But like a regular ale yeast is a top fermenting yeast, which means it'll actually flocculate. It'll form a small little like cake almost at the top of when you're brewing or when you're fermenting beer. And once it reaches once it's consumed a certain amount of sugar, it'll actually drop out in suspension in the liquid in the beer. By that time, it's considered beer. It's crazy, the yeast. I can go on forever with yeast. But yeah, so if you bought a beer that had been conditioned or refrigerated since it left the brewery, and you took it out of the refrigerator and it had like Sierra Nevada used to have, you'd buy a bottle of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale and it would have like at least a eighth of an inch of yeast at the bottom of it, which is good for the yeast is good for you. But if you let that yeast heat up to a certain temperature, like 70, 75 degrees, it'll actually become active again. And if there's any sugars left in that beer, like maltose sugar, it'll actually start fermenting that even more, which could put off esters. I've even seen bottles of beer explode before because they, back in the day, there still would be a slight amount of sugar left in that beer, but you took it and refrigerated it and it kind of put the yeast to sleep, but you didn't fully ferment it all. Like I'm talking homebrew here. You didn't fully ferment it all the way. Well, you take it out, say you take it to a party or your friend's house and you forget about it. Like it's in your truck or something. You forget about the cases of beer in there. It heats up. Well, within a day or two, you start hearing boom, boom, or in your closet or something, bang, bang. You go in there and there's this huge mess from beer bottles exploding because your homebrew, you didn't quite say you didn't add it to the bottle. You added it to the bottle a little too early, and the yeast hadn't fermented the sugars all the way yet. And you start getting explosions and messes. And yeah, my great grandpa was telling me a story one time. He was a moonshiner back in the day, but he used to make beer, and they would bottle it in the swing top type. What is that? A Kolsch type bottle.
Mm-hmm.
And those were the Kolsch type bottles. I mean, they would build up even more pressure than a regular cork or a regular cap because you have that little mechanism that holds the cork down, a little swing top thing. And he used to homebrew with those. Well, there was one time he made a batch of homebrew, and what they used to do back in the day when they would brew a batch of beer, they would leave the they would brew the batch of beer and then they add it to the fermenter, right? Well, they'd let it cool down naturally. So they'd add like boiling hot beer or wort, which is unfermented beer, to the fermenter, and then they let it cool down naturally with the top open. So it would attract wild yeast, which aren't always bad, and it would spontaneously ferment from wild yeast. Well, some of these wild yeast weren't really, what's the word I'm thinking of? They weren't really, they were kind of spontaneous. Like they weren't predictable.
Mm-hmm.
So they would think these guys, like my great grandpa, they would think, oh, okay, this after about a week of fermentation, they'd say, oh, it looked like the fermenter settled down. There wasn't bubbles coming out or whatever. So they'd go and bottle it in these Kolsch bottles. And what they'd do, they would put them in their closet because it was dark. Because these Kolsch bottles were like green color. It let a lot of light in, and they didn't want their beer to get skunky. So they put it in their closets in these wooden cases, like you would think of a case of Sierra Nevada, 24 bottles, but they were made out of wood. And my grandpa was telling a story I was little, but he was telling a story how, this one batch he put in there, and it was like a week later, they were like laying in bed sleeping, and then all of a sudden, you hear boom, and he was like, what was that? Like he was thinking we were at war or something, and, he wouldn't hear anything. He'd go back to bed, and then like the next morning you hear boom. And this went on for like a while because this case of beer he had put in the closet, he put it at the very back of the closet, not anywhere near their clothes or anything. And he didn't think anything of it. Well, finally it was like a month or two later, his buddies were over there playing poker or something. And he was like, oh, I got some homebrew. Let me go get it. Well, he went to go get it. Well, like all but like 2 bottles had exploded. And he's like, and it was a mess back in there. And he's like, oh, okay, that's what those explosions were. Because he never figured out what those explosions were. Because it was always like when he was asleep or like somewhere else, or like my great grandma would be like, he'd be out working and he'd come in and my grandma would be like, I heard something explode. I don't know, I don't know what it was. Did a tree branch fall on the roof or something? Anyways, come to find out it was the homebrew.
Yeah, I never had a bottle of beer explode, but I've had similar experiences because I remember I bought what was it? I think it was Lindemans. It was like a limited release. And Lindemans, for those who don't know, brews a very specific style of beer. They're a Belgian brewery, and they brew what's called a lambic ale, where they actually just let the wort sit in the open air, and the wild yeast in the air spontaneously ferment the beer.
They call it a farmhouse. Was it a farmhouse lambic? That's what they used to call the old ones. They ferment it in the farm.
The farmhouse ales. Yeah, you got the farmhouse ales, but the lambics are very specific thing unto
they
themselves.
Do like fruits and stuff with lambic. I think like cherry lambic.
Yeah, they're only made in this one particular valley in Belgium because the yeast that is in the air in that particular valley gives the lambic ales their characteristic. Like there's a lot of varieties of sour beer out there, but the lambic ales in particular have the one particular sour profile that comes from that yeast that lives in that valley.
Whatever that region produces,
So that's what a lambic ale is, and so I
have had lambic. It's not my favorite, but
I'm not one for like the fruit lambics.
Yeah.
Well, at least for the Lindemans fruit lambics, those are more like desserty because they use like syrup in them. So they're actually sweet, which
and they're
occasionally,
delicious. But
occasionally it's fine, but most of the time it's not. When I want a beer, it's not what I want.
Exactly.
But occasionally, what you actually find their unsweetened stuff that they make, and it's just the raw sourness of the lambic, and I'm a particular fan of that in particular.
Yeah, see, I'm not a fan of the sour. I've had multiple sours. I'm like, I just don't like this.
Yeah,
but I'm so used to a regular ale,
I don't know. I guess I just like them all.
Like the saisons and stuff like that. I'm down with that, but
you're not. But you're not down with the lambics.
I have had lambics, and I've had good lambics, but I've also had some weird lambic. Like the best lambic I've had, it was a cherry lambic. I don't remember the brand or whatever the brewery was. It was from Belgium, I think, or it was.
Yeah, if it's a lambic, it's from Belgium.
Yeah, it was an exotic lambic or whatever. And I think it was like between me and four dudes, we shared the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's not anything you want to drink a 6-pack of.
No.
It's definitely a conversation, sipping kind of with a little. What are those? The snifters or whatever?
Oh yeah, it's definitely a sipping sort of beer, special occasion sort of beer.
And then you can say, "Hey, I've had an exotic beer."
Yeah, but so they put out I found like a bottle of something they put out, which is like they like brewed it with basil or something, and I was intrigued. As to what that would taste like because it wasn't one of their sweetened ones. It was just one of the straight sour lambics.
And basil,
and they added basil to it. So I was like, I was just curious. So I bought a bottle and I was excited to try it because even if I didn't like it, it was like
it's pesto pale ale.
Like where else am I gonna try a beer like that?
Nobody has that on tap. Yeah.
And then so I get it home, I pop it in the fridge for a little bit, and then time comes for me to try it. I'm so excited, and I pop the top, and all of a sudden, just
even though you've chilled it a little bit,
it's just gushing,
it was overpressurized,
gushing out the top, and it's just like
you're all not my lambic.
Yeah, I had to run to the sink, and it was I think I salvaged like a quarter of it.
Was it one with a cork?
Yeah, it had the cork. It had the one with the
where you
like where you pull the cork out. Yeah, because it has a little rounded part.
Yep,
it was one of those. And as soon as I popped the cork off that thing, it was just gushing out.
You're all $13 down the drain.
Yeah, it was just, but it was just one of those things. It was the wild yeast that was in there was unpredictable.
They're unpredictable, but some of them they're pretty exotic. Like I said, I wouldn't drink a lot of it, but when it touches your lips, you have a little sip. You're like, this is definitely not Sierra Nevada. This is exotic. So yeah, beer is good. God is great, beer is good, and people are crazy.
Yeah. That's how that country song goes.
Yep.
All right. Well,
Well, we got brewery, yeah.
Yeah.
Can I tell a joke?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
I heard this joke. If you guys that are listening has ever heard of Chick Wilfong, he is a hilarious dude. He's a farmer. He has a little YouTube channel or whatever, but he tells jokes. But I heard it from him, so don't hold me to that. But no cuss words except for the P word, and wait till you hear the P word. It's not what you think. So, anyways, so there's this old guy. He's about 85, pushing 86. He gets a letter in the mail one day, and it's from the IRS. And he opens the letter up, and it says, we in other words, we've seen a lot of money coming in and out of your accounts. We want to audit you. And he's like, oh crap, So it's on the letter. It said, come into our office and we'll deal with it or whatever. So he goes there on the date it says and talks to the guy, and he goes, yeah, he brings a lawyer with him because he's like, this doesn't sound like normal. So I should probably bring a lawyer. So he brings a lawyer with him. The lawyer's sitting there. He's quiet. He's just listening. So they're in the IRS offices. IRS agent's office, and the old guy goes, yeah, so what's the problem here? And the IRS agent goes, we've seen some large amounts of money coming in and out of your account, and there's no paperwork to back it up. And he goes, and so we thought we'd audit you because something just didn't add up. And so the old guy, he goes, I do a little gambling here and there. He's all, yeah, I pretty much bet on anything. And the IRS agent goes, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, and the old guy goes, well, take for instance, he goes, I'll bet you $1,000 I could bite my own eye. And the IRS agent goes, well, I didn't see you come in with a cane. I don't think you're blind. I'll take up that bet. Okay. And they shook hands and so the guy took out his eye, it was a fake eye, took out his eye and bit it. And the IRS agent goes, oh, damn it. You got me there. You bit your own eye. And the older guy goes, he goes, oh, just wait a minute. And he goes, I'll give you a chance to win your money back. We'll double or nothing. I'll bet you double or nothing. I could bite my other eye. And he goes, well, I know you're not blind. The IRS, I know you're not blind. So I'll take you up on that and win my money back. So the old guy takes out his false teeth and bites his other eye. And the IRS agent goes, damn it, you got me again. And he goes, no, don't worry. I'll give you a chance to win your money back. He's all, I'll bet you, see that trash can on the other side of your desk? I bet I could stand on your desk and piss all the way across your desk. That's the P word, piss. I bet I could piss all the way across your desk and not get one drop on your desk, but I'll pee right into that trash can without getting a drop on your desk. And the IRS agent goes, he's happy. He goes, oh, you can't pee all the way across. It's a 8-foot desk. You can't pee all the way across that desk without getting a drop on that desk. And so he makes the bet. Old man drops it. He jumps on the desk, drops his pants, pisses all over the IRS agent's desk, and the IRS agent gets up and goes, "Ha! Got you! Ha ha!" And he's happy. And the lawyer sitting in the corner, he's shaking his head, and the IRS agent goes, well, "What's your problem?" And the lawyer says, "Well, he bet me $10,000 he'd piss all over your desk, and you'd just love it."
That's a good one.
That was it.
That's a good one.
That's my joke.
All right. So yeah, we've talked about a lot of interesting things, and we're getting on 2 hours here. Nice. So there's one more thing I'd actually like to ask you about.
What's that?
So I've heard from a little birdie in my ear while I was out getting beer.
Oh, nice.
That you have kind of an interesting testimony from before you knew the Lord.
Yeah.
Is there any
Yeah.
stories that you'd be willing to share?
Sure. Yeah. I have a lot of interesting stories, but we don't have time for that today. But yeah, so I kind of grew up since we moved back from Germany, and so yeah, we actually moved from Hoffland to Ukiah when I was younger. So I think I was in I want to say I was in kindergarten or something like that. Maybe preschool. I think we moved when I was in preschool up to Ukiah, which is in Mendocino County. Um, and ever since then, I remember my mom was a part of a Baptist church in Ukiah, and really not really, nice church, whatever. It was big and it had a lot of the congregation was huge. And she worked at the preschool there and stuff like that. But I would attend the church because my mom went there. My dad never went to church really. I believe I think my sister went with us. I don't really remember a lot back then, but I remember going to church with my mom when I was young. And it was a Baptist church. It was just kind of boring to me. I never really was spiritually fed there. Let's put it that way. I always thought it was boring. I only liked doing, if we broke out from church service and it was like children's church, I liked doing the games and stuff like that, but I was never spiritually fed. So let's start there. So fast forward to young adulthood, say, I think I was 17, something like that, right out of high school. I might have been 18 by then. I went through a time where I kind of, and it wasn't my parents' fault. My parents were really good parents. I was never abused. I was, nothing you would think of that it would be bad. But, young kids they always wanted to get out on their own and do their own thing and stuff. Well, I called it wildcatting. I was just out wildcatting. But if you hear me, Jarrett, that's what I was doing. I was wildcatting. So I just kind of, I wasn't homeless because I always had a place to stay. Like I had lots of friends that were, had houses or their parents did whatever that were around my age. So I just kind of I call it bum around. I just kind of was hanging out, just living life, experiencing things I didn't experience before, traveling a little bit, this and that. Not traveling far, but just going and seeing new things, stuff like that. And, but I always had a place to stay, and thinking back, because I wasn't working at the time, I didn't have any money, and I never went a day without eating at least one or two meals because of the friends I had, even just the spirit I brought to people that didn't even know me. I would just be talking to somebody and they say, hey, can I buy you a sandwich or something? And I'd be like, yeah, heck yeah, I'm freaking hungry. But it was just the spirit I brought to people because I wasn't rude. I just wasn't rude. I always had a good aura about me, I guess you could say. And so anyways, every night I always had a place to stay. I never went hungry. And like I said, I wasn't working at the time. I literally didn't have $1 to my name. Back then I didn't say, hey, I'm trusting on you, God, to have this stuff for me, like the food and the shelter and stuff like that. I never thought like, hey, God, blah, blah, blah. I obviously, as an adult thinking back, I'm like, oh my God, God had me, like he totally had me under his arms. Like he never let me go hungry. He never let me go cold or anything, like in the winter, even in the summer. I was never sleeping outside when it was 100 degrees or anything like that. I was always under his arm. Well, back then I didn't really know God like I do nowadays. And so anyways, so there was an instance and it happened multiple times. I mean, I could name 30 different times, but this one time I think I was 18 by then. Back then I was smoking cigarettes and drinking beer and stuff like that, being stupid and just hanging around the wrong people and stuff like that. Well, this one night I was hanging around the wrong people They were having a party and stuff like that. Well, the party ended, like the cops came or something like that. And so everybody like scattered, and there was these people, like this girl that I didn't know really, but she had kind of like been flirting with me that night. She looked older, maybe a couple years older. So she had to have been probably 20 or 21. Her and this other guy were leaving, like she had a car, and she's like, "Do you want to go with me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I got to get out of here." Well, this is like in December or something. It's raining outside. I was in shorts and flip flops and a t-shirt, and it's, I mean, in December it's pretty cold. I mean, it was probably in the 40s, maybe low 50s, which is pretty cold to be outside. And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll go with you guys." And anyways, got in the car, and I didn't know where she lived. Well, she lived like on the other side of town, the north end of town in Ukiah. And when I got there, I'm kind of like, this is kind of like slum area, looks kind of sketchy, blah, blah, blah. It was like this little like strip motel. It's like, 30 motel rooms, but they're like, 10 by 10 type rooms. I'm like, this is sketchy, dude. Anyways, get in there, and we're, me and the girl are kind of flirting, whatever, blah, 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 after a while. And then like her door busting, like this guy kicks in her door, and he's like, "What? Who are all these people?" Blah, blah, blah. Anyways, come to find out, it's like her roommate or something. And the other kid that was with us, I guess he was out like rummaging around, like trying to steal something, or like I don't know what he was doing, but he was rummaging around out in the living room, which I guess this girl I was with was only renting the room that we were in. So the guy that came with us was out like pilfering around in the guy that was renting the room to the girl, which I didn't know. I didn't really know any of them, but and the guy's like, "I just caught him trying to steal something, blah, blah." Anyway, so he like kicks us out. He was like, had the other guy by the hair, and I'm like, "I gotta get out of here, dude. Like, I don't know what is happening. I was just here trying to spend the night." Anyways, it's literally pouring down rain. And we're on the north end of town. There's nothing around there. And it's pouring down rain. And I just happened to look up, and I'm like, there was like this bright light. And I'm like, what is that? And it was one light out in the middle of it was like one of those mobile home. They sell those like prefab houses. They're like brand new little prefab, whatever you call them, mobile homes. It was this one light, and it was like casting this light down to this one mobile home. And I'm like, something in my mind, I didn't know if it was, I didn't know back then that it was God talking to me back then, but something in my mind was like, you need to go to that where that light is shining on that mobile home. And as I'm walking there, I passed like 6 different mobile homes, and I checked all the doors. All the doors are locked, all of them, on these brand new, they're like brand new, whatever they call them, mobile homes, whatever, manufactured homes. All of them are locked. I get to the one where the light from this light pole is shining down on it. Unlocked. The door's unlocked. I'm like, I have to seek shelter. I have to go into this thing. And it's like 6 deep. So, I mean, it's like pretty far back in there in this huge lot of, whatever that company was that was selling them. Go in there, spend the night in the like closet. I stayed warm. Everything was great. I was dry. Woke up the next morning. The sun was shining. It was gorgeous, beautiful. I go outside, walk. I walked like 2 miles back to the place that I had started that previous night, and it met up with some friends or whatever. And, back then I didn't know what that was. I just thought, hey, it's a fluke. It's good luck. You know what I mean? It's whatever. Well, after like being born again and like realizing that God is good and like just all the aspects of it, thinking back to that situation, I was under God's arm the whole time. He literally there was probably 5 of those light poles in that lot of prefab, whatever. None of the light bulbs were working. except for that one. And as I was walking past all those others, I think there was like 6 or 7 of those other ones, checking to see if the doors were unlocked just so I can get out of the rain, because there was nowhere else. There was nothing around. All of them were locked except for the one that was under the light. It was like, thinking back now, I'm like, that was totally God telling me, hey, stay in this place. It's far enough back. I left it unlocked for you. There, it's warm in there. You're, even if, and I think that was on a Saturday night. So like the next day was Sunday. So I don't think that company was open that day anyways to sell prefabs or whatever, mobile homes. But it was thinking back, it was just like, oh my God, like that was totally God. And he told me when I was leaving that apartment or whatever, like, hey, it's pouring down rain. There's the light. It's shining down to the one that's unlocked. Go there. You seek shelter, Thinking back now, I'm like, oh my God, like that was totally, but
and
totally.
It's a great metaphor too.
Yeah.
As you were telling that story, just the idea of staying in God's light came to mind. And so I want to read 1 John 1:7, or I'll start in verse 6. Let's start in verse 5, just so we can get some context. It says, "This is the message we have heard from him and announced to you, that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. If we say that we have fellowship with him and yet walk in the darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. But if we walk in the light, as he himself is in the light, we have fellowship with one another, and the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin."
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard that story from you before. So
yeah, I think Sarah's the only one, maybe Sarah's mom, but maybe my son, but my older son, but I don't tell a lot of people that, because I wasn't, that was so that's where I led up to it. So it was like that whole period where I was kind of wildcatting. I never went one night without either staying at a friend's house. I never went one day without eating at least lunch or dinner. You know what I mean? But then there was that one time where once I left that party or whatever, it was like that the feeling of getting kicked out of that. Like, hey, you can't be here because this other guy did something, even though I wasn't doing anything wrong. I had to leave because it was his establishment. So like right when I got outside, the feeling of like abandonment, but it was like within a minute, that light, it was just like, hey, come seek shelter here. But I didn't know what it was back then. You know what I mean? To me, it was just like, oh, what a coincidence. All of these prefabs were locked except for the one that was where the light was shining down. It was just, but obviously thinking back now, I was like, oh my gosh, that was totally God, like taking care of me. It was as subtle as leaving the door unlocked for me and having the, light shine on. Sometimes, like me now, I see those subtle things where God will tell you, it might not be that, Justin, go here. It's just a subtle little hint to like, hey, don't go down that road, or hey, do this or do that. And there's been times where I didn't listen and something did happen. And I was like, I should have listened to that. And some people will call it a gut feeling, but it's a God feeling. That's what it is. And I'm not even 40 yet. I'm almost 30. I'll be 39 next month. And it's like, I'm still young, but I have realized now when you hear those little tiny subtle hints or voices, please just like listen to them, if it's good. If you hear something where it's like, hey, go kill this guy, don't listen to that one, because there's other voices that'll talk to you too. But,
always check it against God's words.
Exactly. Too. Yes. Yeah. Triple check it.
But yeah, I mean, that's such a beautiful example of just the fact that God, even when we're not seeking him, he's always drawing on us.
Sure. Yeah. And I wasn't seeking him at all back then.
I mean, I had I wasn't not quite as amazing and wild as that story, but I had kind of a similar experience where after I became an adult, I was just didn't have any direction because I was, grew up in the church and I was a faithful church kid up until about
You were a good boy.
late high school or so, where I'm like, I don't know about this church thing no more. And I kind of stepped away from it for a little while.
And you probably felt like you weren't really being fed spiritually, maybe in the time that, that whatever you were going through at the time.
Yeah. And I mean, I had great mentors, people who spoke into my life for sure. But just for whatever reason, I was just young and dumb and I just wanted to step away from it. And I did. And
you were wildcatting.
I wasn't working. I didn't have any direction in life. I didn't have anything. I didn't know what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. Yeah. But during that time period, I just look back on it and I could have easily become like a homeless drug addict or something.
Sure, yeah.
But just because of the right people coming into my life and helping me out and pushing me along and keeping me going, I got through that period in my life.
Yeah. And they were your little angels.
Yeah, me. And even though I wasn't seeking God, looking back on that time, I can see that He Definitely had my best interest in mind the whole time.
Sure, yeah. And look at you now. You're awesome. So, yeah. You want to talk music at all? Are we about out of time?
I think we're about out of time. I think we've.
I just gotta say, music's awesome, dude.
Yeah, I mean. It is quite awesome, but
we'll have to come. I'll have to come back and we'll do another one.
Oh yeah, for sure. We'll have to do a part 2.
Sure. As I know, lots of stuff to talk about. It's just a lot of people get bored.
Yeah, I know. Jake and his sisters like to do 3-hour podcasts.
Yeah.
I'm not really
2 hours. That's pretty good. Yeah.
I'm not really into that. So, but we'll definitely have to do a part 2, and maybe Jake can join us for that one too. Sure. So that'll be Maybe
it'll be a winter time when it's cooler outside.
Yeah, or maybe
it's 100 degrees here. By
maybe
the way.
A time when our AC works. All right. So yeah. So I want to say thank you, Justin, for coming on and
sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sharing your story and just adding to the conversation that is Snarp Fangle. And thank you to all the listeners who are tuning in at whatever date this episode actually drops. And just
hashtag Snarp Fangle.
Yeah. Just wherever you are, whenever you are, when you're listening to this episode, farewell and have a good day or night or morning or afternoon or whatever it is.
Right.
Just Snarp Fangle on.
Right. Snarp Fangle out.
Bye-bye now.